When it comes to subtraction, we're going to be working with grouping and regrouping like we did with addition. So the first thing that we need to understand with subtraction is how to think in terms of place value like we did with addition. So here I have the example 35 minus 18. But since we're subtracting, I'm not going to group all this together. So I'm showing 35 in the top row. So here I have 3 tens, or 3 times 10, which is 30. And then I have my 5 ones, or 5 times 1, which is 5. So that represents the number 35. Then in the next row, I have 1 to represent 1 times 10, which is 10. And then I have 8. So that would be 8 times 1, 8 ones, which represents 1 or 8. So this represents the number 18. We want to subtract 35 minus 18. However, you may notice when looking in the ones place that we have less ones in our big number 35 than we do in our little number 18. So we can't take away 8 ones from just 5 ones. Therefore, we're going to take one of the tens in our 35 and we're going to break it up into 10 ones. That way we'll have enough ones to subtract these 8 ones from. So here you can see where I have redrawn 35 by taking one of the ones and bringing it down here and breaking it up into 10 ones, and then I still have the 5 ones that I started with. So we end up with 15 ones altogether. So here's 15 ones. And I'm left with my 2 tens since I broke up one of them. Now I want to subtract 18 from what I actually end up breaking up into 2 times 10 plus 15 times 1. So I actually broke this up into 20 plus 15, which is still 35, right? But instead of having 30 plus 5 to get 35, like we did here, I now have 20 plus 15. So it's the same amount, just broken up differently. And I'm going to subtract 8 of these ones from 8 of the ones in our number 35. And you can see I have canceled out the 8 ones in my number 18 and 8 of the ones in my number 35. When I do that, I'm left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ones. And when I subtract my tens place, I end up canceling my bottom 10 with one of my top tens, and I'm left with only 1 10. So this ends up looking like the following: 1 10 and 7 ones, which obviously is going to be 1 times 10, which is 10, 7 ones, which is 7, and that gives us 17 as our answer. The way that we would normally complete this problem is that we, of course, wouldn't draw out all these pictures. We would just work with the arithmetic. So we would borrow 1 from the 3 in the tens place, so it becomes a 2, and that 1 10 changes into 10 ones that's added in our ones place. So essentially what we're really doing is we are taking a 10 and a 15 in our big number and subtracting a 1 and an 8 in our smaller number. And when we do this, we end up with 17. And a lot of times the way people show their steps is they would just cross out the 3, make it a 2, and put a 1 beside the 5 for 15. If you prefer, you can also just cross out that 5 and replace it with a 15 if that's easier for you to look at. Doesn't matter. In this next problem, I have 20 minus 13, and I'm showing you 20 with 2 tens because 2 times 10 is 20. And then I'm showing you 13 with 1 10 because 1 times 10 is 10 plus 3 ones because 3 times 1 is 3, and that gives us a total of 13. Now, we need to be able to take away these 3 ones from the ones in 20, but we don't have any ones in 20. So we're going to regroup. We're going to take one of the ones and break it up into 10 ones. So when we do that, our problem looks like this. So we took away one of the ones and broke it up into 10 ones, and we're left with one of the tens. So ultimately what we did is we changed this problem from 2 tens into 1 10 and 10 ones. 1 10 is 10, 10 little ones is 10, and that still equals the value of 20. It's just represented in a different way that we can work with. Now we're going to subtract 13 from 20. So we have these 3 ones that we're going to subtract from these 10 ones, and you can see the X's that show them canceling. We're also going to subtract this 110 from the 110 we have left from our 20. So though both of those cancel, we're left with nothing in the tens place. So we end up with 7 ones. So our answer is 7. And of course this makes sense. 20 minus 13 is 7. You can probably do that in your head or count it out on your fingers. To show the math, we would have 20 minus 13. And since we can't subtract 3 from 0, we need to borrow from the tens place. So we take away one of the tens, which makes the 2 a 1, and we add those tens to the ones place. So ultimately what we're working with then is going to be a 1 and a 10 minus a 1 and 3, which is what we saw in the picture. 1 minus 1 is 0, 10 minus 3 is 7, and that's our answer. Again, you can show your steps the way I've shown right in here, or you can break it down even further, or if it's simpler, you can put that 1 beside the 0 to show 10. It doesn't matter. Try this next problem while pausing the video and then check back. In this problem, we need to borrow 1 from the tens place, and when we do that, it ends up adding 10. That 1 changes into 10 ones in the ones place. So we end up with a 3 in the tens place and 12 in the ones place. But then we also are going to have to borrow from the hundreds place because we can't subtract 7 from 3. And when we do that, the 3 becomes a 2 in the hundreds place, and that 1 that we brought over to the tens place is going to be added as 10. And when we do that, we ultimately have a 2 in the hundreds place, a 13 in the tens place, and a 12 in the ones place. And when we subtract, we end up with 69. Pause the video and try these 3 problems. In the first problem, there was no need to borrow, and you end up with 410. In the second problem, you end up having to borrow 1 from your tens place and add it to your ones place so that you have a big enough number to subtract 9 from. You end up with 12 minus 9, which is great, but this 0 here that you ended up with is not big enough to subtract 6 from. So we're going to have to borrow 1 from the hundreds place. So we're going to add 10 to that 0 and subtract 1 from the 3 in the hundreds place to make it 2. So that 2 is not going to be big enough to take the 4 from, and so we're going to have to take 1 away from the thousandths place and add 10 to the hundredths place. So we ultimately end up with 1, 12, 10, 12 minus 469. And your answer is 1,843. This last problem is a classic, tends to confuse people, so it's really important we understand it. Now you're going to start with the ones place, and you notice you always start with the ones place and see if you can subtract. Obviously 0 is nothing, right? It means nothing. So we can't take 9 from nothing. We need something there. So we're going to take 1 away from the tens place and add 10 into the ones place. The problem is when we take 1 away from the tens place, there's nothing there. So we're going to have to take 1 away from the hundreds place in order to add 10 to the tens place. Again, we're going to repeat this process, and we see that there's nothing in the hundreds place, so we're going to have to add 10 there by taking away 1 from the thousandths place. So we end up with 10 in the ones place. We end up with a 9 in the tens place because of this 10 minus 1. We end up with a 9 in the hundreds place because of this 10 minus 1. And then we end up with a 2 in the thousands place because of the 3 minus 1. Now you can subtract, and you should end up with 2,801. Now try 1 through 4 on the next slide and then check your answers. The answers are on the next page, but here are the steps. In this next to last slide, I would like you to go ahead and do the subtraction and addition, and after you get your answer, you're going to round to the nearest 100 to practice rounding. Pause and then come back and check your answers. Again, the answers are on the next slide, but you can pause and see the steps here.